Hey guys, I'm learning TFT and I'm sharing my learnings with you so that you can learn and I can learn better as well. In this video, I'm super excited to congratulate Marcel P for a very well-deserved TCP Cup victory. He has just been amazing at getting better at the game. I've been just in awe at how he has steadily improved over time. Of course, he's been my coach for a while. Consider him one of the players in this space that I know the best at the top levels. And I've just been able to see how he thinks, how he improves his growth mindset. And yeah, just super excited that he was able to pull this off. And I know it also means a lot to him and his wife because let's play this really quick. This was right after he won.
Fucking did it, dude.
Fucking did it, yeah. And his story, if you don't know, he quit a very lucrative, well-paying job as a staff engineer, AI staff engineer at Google last year, a little over a year ago, to pursue this full time. And his wife basically became the bread earner for his family. And so for him to be able to work so hard and have this payoff, it's just really sweet to see them share that moment. But in this video, I'm going to really go into the thought process of, given that I've worked with Marcel for so long, a lot of his insights into how he thinks, his mindset. I'm going to do a meta mindset about that. Last year, I actually did an interview with Marcel where we talked for like an hour and a half about, this was shortly after he had posted his Reddit post on how to get better at TFT, which if you haven't seen, I would highly suggest. This was after he hit rank 2. This was also about the time that he was deciding to go full time. I talked to him for about an hour and a half about just his approach to the game, how he thinks. So I'll talk like high level about some of my takeaways from that interview. I won't go into his full Reddit post, but some stuff that aligns with this meta mindset for that. And then this guy's a beast. After he won the cup, he went on a 5-hour stream where he VOD reviewed all of his games. So he reviewed all of his tourney games, game 1, game 2, to think about what he could have done better, right? Like most people, when they win, they're like, they just want to soak it in, right? And Marcel here is right after he won, he goes back and thinking, what could I have done better? What can I learn from this? How can I get even better, right? And that's what it takes to be operating at these elite levels. It reminds me of when LeBron, after he won a championship, people were asking him, what are you going to do to celebrate? What are you going to do tomorrow, right? And LeBron was like, back to the gym, right? Get ready for next season, right? And so much of this is about mindset. So yeah, I'm going to go over my learnings. I kind of summarize my general learnings. So this is not just going to be for 14 or 15.4b patch. Marcel was talking about a lot of stuff from a tactical and strategic level that is patch agnostic. So this is more like fundamental takeaways that I'm going to talk about. That's definitely going to be relevant. And I took notes on the patch specific stuff. I'm not sure if I'm actually going to go into that since I want this video to be more high level and useful beyond just this specific patch. But I'll share my notes of this page in the description below, as well as my interview with Marcel, his Reddit post. So you can take a look at all of these resources on your own as well. So with that said, and I'll include timestamps in the descriptions below since I'm starting with the meta mindset, which is a psychological philosophical segment to help you get better at TFT, but it should also be helpful for you in life. If you want to skip ahead, take a look at the timestamps. All right, so meta mindset of the day is you either win or you learn. And this idea is actually from a Jalen Hurts quote.
Really don't show right now. A lot of emotion. Can you describe your emotion?
This is so he's was the quarterback of the Philadelphia Eagles. I'm actually not sure if he still is. They lost to the Kansas City Chiefs in 2022. and this was his post game interview, and someone was asking him, "How do you feel?"
You either win or you lose, or you either win or you learn. That's how I feel. You either win or you learn. So, as always, win, lose, or draw, I always reflect on the things that I could have done better, things we could have done better.
They said, win, lose, or draw, I always think about the things I could have done better. And that's similar to what Marcel did, right? And Jalen Hurts, after losing that Super Bowl, he said, that lit a flame, lit a fire in me, right? And he lost the Chiefs in 2022, and they came back, and he ended up beating the Chiefs the second time in the Super Bowl. And he won. So, like, again, that's just that mentality that when you lose, you don't let them make you a victim. You empower yourself and you say, what can I learn from this experience? Frodan interviewed Marcel yesterday after his win, and Marcel was saying this was actually his first cup of TCP. He got bought 8 in the tournament, got knocked out in the first day, and he was basically saying, like, he used that as fuel. He wasn't as prepared in that tournament, and that was a motivating force for him, right? I recently put out a tweet that was like reasonably popular, where I said that mistakes aren't failures, they're fuel. Don't blame it. Don't burn it on blame or pity. Channel your anger and disappointment to learn, adapt, and grow. And Tanner said this is a real enlightening life suggestion, and of course it works for TFT. And a big part of my meta mindsets is about using TFT as a metaphor for life, that all of these ideas you can apply to your life, right? And this reminds me of a Jordan quote where this was actually a commercial way back in the day talking about failure.
I've missed more than 9,000 shots in my career. I've lost almost 300 games. 26 times I've been trusted to take the game-winning shot and missed. I've failed over and over and over again in my life. And that is why I succeed.
Yeah, so it's through the failures that help you succeed. Instead of viewing your mistakes and your failures, like Marcel not doing well in that first cup, as a sign of disappointment or that you're not good enough, it's like what Jalen Hurts said, like, use that as fuel. Let that light a fire in you to work harder, to analyze what you could have done better, to learn from your mistakes, to energize yourself, right? And I think that's why so many people love sports and in esports, like watching people fail but then get back up and keep going. That reminds me of kind of, for me personally, as a kid, my parents, like, I grew up in a very traditional, like, kind of tiger parents family. And anytime I would come home with anything less than 100%, like starting in elementary school on a test, my mom would basically criticize me, yell at me. I would have to, like, stand against the corner of, and I had a very poor relationship with failure and mistakes at an early age. And I'm not quite sure how I shifted that mindset over time. But even now when I play TFT, and I've talked to my therapist about this a lot, when I make, like, a very obvious mistake, especially if it's in a high pressure situation, like I'm trying to play in more tournaments, I'm actually trying right now to see if I can qualify for to get a bye for the trials, because I'm doing pretty well in the ladder right now. See where I am right now. I think it's top 30 get a bye, and right now I am 43. You get like another 100, 200 LP or so. And I actually just did a meta session with Marcel last week before his tourney prep, and I think that's really been paying off right now. But when I'm playing in these tournaments and I make a big mistake, I still feel that shrunken feeling I felt as a child when my parents were yelling at me for making like the smallest of mistakes. And I think society in general, like most kids probably grew up that way. I don't know that all kids grew up that way. But as a child, especially in a world where you're surrounded by grown-ups who are bigger than you, who are more knowledgeable than you, it can feel very overwhelming to make mistakes, and the judgment that you feel, and like, especially if you don't. For me as a child, I felt only loved. It felt like conditional love upon me being successful in some way, being right all the time, never making a mistake. And with my kids, my son's 8, my daughter is 5. Like, my daughter is actually going through her first kind of sports experience. Basically this year, she played softball for the first time in the spring and is currently playing softball and basketball now. Just started, and I'm coaching all of her teams, coached my son's teams as well. And anytime, especially I think for girls, it's maybe more challenging because boys usually start playing games and sports at an earlier age and are more used to falling down, getting scraped up, bumping, losing in games. But anytime I try to give her feedback of something that she could have done better, she kind of shuts down and shrinks back. And I think part of this is I'm still working on how to give more constructive feedback, surround that negative feedback with a lot more positive feedback. Although my own internal talk track is a lot of just negative, like, oh, I could do this better, oh, I could do that better. And so I'm trying to learn to filter that for my children. But with my son, like, even early on when he was playing basketball, like now he joined an AAU team for basketball, which is getting a lot more serious. They like do 3 or 4 practices a week, 1 to 2 games a week, and he's quite good. But like early on when he first started learning how to do layups, he missed, I don't know, like a few 5 shots in a row, and he was like, I suck at this, like I quit, right? And if you think about Jordan or Jalen Hurts or even like Marcel in this first tournament, like if you want to do anything meaningful in life, if you have a dream, you have a goal, you're going to hit bumps in the road. You're not going to get there right away. And in fact, if you're able to take a helicopter to the top of the mountain and you take a look at the view from there, like, it doesn't actually mean as much as if you had to pour your blood, sweat, and tears. You struggle. You tried and failed maybe many times before you were able to get there. And then the day that you finally get there, that's what makes it so meaningful. That's what makes, Marcel's that clip with his wife so meaningful, is because he's tried many times and he's failed many times. And it is through those obstacles and that emotional challenge that makes the journey so meaningful. At the end of the day, your achievements, your titles, like all of these things, like, to be, from my perspective, like, don't really mean that much. You can have all the people in the world saying you're amazing, but you won't necessarily feel that way. And to me, it's really about the journey and then appreciating when you get there. It's almost like that feeling when you win. It's the appreciation of all the pain and sweat that you experience to get there. And that's also what I'm trying to teach to my kids. It's like there's no losing, there's no mistakes. It's only a true mistake if you don't learn from it. It's only a true loss if you don't learn from it, if you don't grow from it. And so now my son is like, after games, actively asking me like, okay, what could I have done better there? What feedback do you have for me, right? And that's the mindset that you want to get into if you want to truly be good at anything. And not just be good, it's like if you have goals, if you have dreams, if there's something you want to achieve, this is the mentality that you have to adopt in order to maximize your odds of achieving those dreams, to be able to get live the life that you want to live, right? All right, so some quotes from books that are associated with these ideas. From his book Rationality, Eliezer Yudkowsky said, "Oops is the sound we make when we improve our beliefs and strategies. So to look back at a time and not see anything you did wrong means that you haven't learned anything or changed your mind since then." So when I in my tweet, when I was talking about how it can be easy to blame other people, like, I actually think this is maybe one of Soju's weaknesses. And I understand that part of him going on his rants is it's going to get him more views. But I think part of this is also psychological about how he can improve his mindset, which is instead of externalizing blame and making yourself a victim, which also means that you are not necessarily learning as much or changing your mind, right? Because if everything is about the world doing something to you, the game low rolling for you, the game being bugged in some way, someone else griefing you, right? As long as you externalizing that blame, you are not changing your mind. You're not learning anything. You are not changing anything about how you will act the next time around, which means that you will then be doomed basically to keep repeating that same, like if the inputs are the same, it's unlikely that the outputs will change. And so when you make a mistake and there is an oops, and you can actually learn and improve your whatever it is about how you see the world, how you might act differently the next time around, that is how you will change the outcomes of your future. Garry Kasparov, the chess master and champion, said, "This is what I call the gravity of past success. Winning creates the illusion that everything is fine. We think only of the positive result without considering all the things that went wrong or that could have gone wrong along the way. After a victory, we want to celebrate, not analyze." And so going back to Marcel's, he does a 5-hour stream. I mean, part of that is he's celebrating with chat. Like, there's a lot of people, coming in, congratulating him, just hanging out with people, people dropping in and saying hi. But part of it is he's very serious. He's taking notes on what he can improve the next time around, right? And so when we win, it can actually be a trap because we think, oh, we're perfect. Oh, we already know everything. Oh, we're good enough, right? And that's actually where, when you fail, when you make mistakes, that's the opportunity. That's the fuel that you can use. And I mean, you can also use success as fuel, like Marcel has done here, and he's still going back and analyzing. But for most people, it's easy to just celebrate. And I'm not saying you shouldn't celebrate, but especially when you make mistakes, that's the door that will lead you to where you want to go. It's not the obstacle. The mistakes and the failures are not the roadblock. The mistakes and failures are the door to open if you can actually maximize the fuel and energy that you can gain from it, right? Well, going back to Jalen Hurts, you use that pain, you use that energy to light a fire in you to improve. Same with Jordan. You use the mistakes, like that shot that Jordan shot that like went in and out around, right? Like you use that so that you go back and practice. This is like actually how Steph Curry practiced. And I still do this with my son, is you start close to the basket, you take a shot, you actually swish the ball 5 times in each spot on the court before you take a step back. That will actually minimize the likelihood that you have the freaking in and out around the hoop. And that's why when you watch Steph Curry, he swishes the ball so much, because in practice, he's not just counting how many makes he takes or makes he gets. Like, he only counts a make as a real make if it's like a true swish. Because then when in the game, when you're actually tired and your legs are giving up in the fourth quarter and the stress and pressure is all there, like all that practice that you put in, that's what pays off. You minimize the likelihood that you're going to have an in and out by switching it. Elliot Aronson said, "An extremely high drive to reduce dissonance would lead man to weave a cocoon about himself. He would never admit his mistakes and would distort reality to make it compatible with his behavior. But if a person is ever to grow, improve, and avoid repeating the same errors, he must sooner or later learn to profit from past mistakes. One cannot profit from one's mistakes without first admitting that one has made a mistake. And yet the admission of error almost always arouses some dissonance. And so this is kind of a discussion around self-image, ego, and as a parent, especially with my daughter right now, I'm very keenly aware of this, because every time I am trying to give feedback to her to help her improve, to help her become aware of her mistakes, she wants to discharge it. She doesn't want to admit that she's made a mistake. And that's the challenge, because I know she wants to get better, she cares, but at the same time she's straddling this line with like thinking she could actually try, thinking she could actually get better and be good. Especially because she watches my son, and he's like the best player on his team, like by a lot, and his teams are winning. And she's watched a lot of that, but she hasn't, I don't think, seen how much practice he's put in. Like at school, like every outdoor recess time, he's just shooting, playing basketball. I don't think she also remembers his first season when he played at her age, and his team was losing and he was making a ton of mistakes. And so that's also a challenge, whether we're playing TFT or in life, and this is magnified by social media, and I've talked about this before, is you see so much of people's successes, but you don't see as much of their failures. You don't see as much of how much work they put into the game. And that's why I think this is so useful when we see Marcel after a victory spending 5 hours and analyzing every nuance of what he could have done better, even though he got the highest point total for that tournament. Not only did he win in checkmate, right? Like sometimes when people win in checkmate, they may have lucked into it and didn't actually have the highest point total. So he performed the best in tournament, and yet he's still going back and seeing what he could have done better. And so really part of being able to even do this process of like learning is first accepting that you are not perfect, and that's okay. And actually that's an opportunity, because if you were perfect, you can't actually get better. But if you accept that you're not perfect, there's always somewhere more that you can, always a way more that you can grow and improve your game. And that's just as true in TFT as it is in life. All right, so that's my meta mindset of the day. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this concept. I know it's been extremely helpful for me, and yet it's still something I'm learning. It's still something that when I play TFT and I lose, it's painful to go back and analyze the game to see what I could have done better. But the more I do it, and especially after I do that, I see the results, right? I look at my my match history, and it's, you know, I don't think it's a coincidence that a lot of times it's after I do a big fall that I get big spikes, right? I get a fall and then I start spiking. It's because a lot of times it's after the fall that I really get serious about going back and analyzing. And this ties back to this idea that it's after wins that you kind of get lazy. You start thinking like, oh, if I just do what I do, like I'll naturally get there. And Dish Soap actually talked about this recently, where he's like, oh, I thought I could just go into the cup with not as much prep and still perform highly, right? And that's the trap. When you win, you start getting lazy. And I'm not saying it always happens, but that's why, you know, this idea of what Marcel's doing here, I think is so appropriate and related to those quotes, is use those losses as fuel, because when you win, it's less likely that you are going to have the energy and motivation to be able to improve. And so it's all about this mindset switch. Once you make that mindset switch, like the world is your oyster. All right, so I'm going to talk briefly about takeaways from my interview with Marcel. These are like kind of high level mindset stuff. First one, growth over ego, just related exactly with the ideas that I was just talking about. He's basically saying, don't worry about how other people look at you. Don't worry about whether you think you're good or not. Like, focus on growth over that. So part of this is, if you're not playing for a snapshot, or you know, or tournament, or you're just trying to climb ranks, right? Don't worry about your LP in the short term. Focus on growth. The growth will follow. Your LP will follow from learning, from getting better. Or if you're in your career, you're early on in your career, don't worry about your title. Like, focus on, and I've talked to this about with many friends when I'm giving them advice, or especially young people earlier in their careers. Frankly, don't worry about how much money you're making. Don't worry about what your title is. Focus on surrounding yourself with people smarter than you, that energize you, that have a way of looking at the world that will help you learn and grow. Because if your slope is high, it doesn't matter what your current position is, you'll get there. And that's a key idea that Marcel talked about when he was at Stanford. One of his CS professors said, your slope is more important than your y-intercept, which ultimately means that if let's say, just TFT as an example, but this is true for life. If you are here and someone else is here, like, don't worry about that gap. What matters is what your slope is. If you have a positive slope and they have a flat slope or even negative slope, especially in TFT, if you're not actually learning or growing, you probably have a declining slope because of how quickly the game changes and how fast your knowledge decays. Or rather, if you actually think what you know is good, but the game changes or a patch changes, you're actually playing a bad comp over time, right? Or fundamentally, like, an aspect, a game mechanic, or a set mechanic changes, that could shift how you want to optimally play the game. And so your slope matters more than your initial position. And that, I think, it ties with ego. If you attach your ego too much with your current position relative to someone else's position, you're focused on the wrong thing. So the growth and the slope is what matters. And that's what you want to focus on. And that's just as true in your career or anything else that you're trying to accomplish in life as it is in TFT. A key idea he also said is hold this paradox of being humble and confident. Being humble is important in order to admit that you make mistakes, admit that you have more to learn and grow from. And yet, being confident is what allows you to commit to learning. It's being confident is what allows you to, like, whether it's Jordan, Jalen Hurts, losing and then having the commitment to say, I'm going to come back and do this again. Or it reminds me of, like, Kobe after he tore his ACL, and he could have just retired, but he's like, no, I'm not going to let that define me, right? This is whole victim versus hero mentality. Like, I'm going to go out on my own terms. And having the confidence and belief that you can actually get there. So there is definitely this paradox of both holding both of them. Because the challenge is, if you are too confident, believing that you are perfect, believing you can do anything, but you're not humble enough, then you are unlikely to receive feedback to improve and grow and learn when you make mistakes. If you are too humble but not confident enough and always self-critical, then oftentimes you'll give up, you'll quit, because you're just saying, I'm not good enough, I don't think I can get there. And that's the subtle line I'm trying to work with my daughter on right now, is finding that confidence, right? And so it's like this paradoxical thing where you're trying to hold both of these almost seemingly conflicting value structures in your mind about how to be humble and growth mindset and learning, and yet be confident in your ability to actually apply the learnings over time to get to where you want to go. Motivation and maximizing energy, especially in relation to Marcel's decision to quit Google last year. And I remember talking with him at the time because he was, like, kind of on the fence about it. And really his mindset was like, how do I maximize energy? Like, both in terms of micro, but also macro. For his macro decision to quit Google was like, what will give me more energy in life, right? And for him, that was TFT. And I think a lot of people in life do the safe thing. They do the thing that's gonna maximize what other people say they should do, or what, make more money, acquire more status. But every little bit that they move in that direction, especially if it's not aligned with their own personal value system, just sucks and drains the energy out of them until, they become 40, 50, 60, and their life force is just gone. They're doing things for other people. They become a shell of themselves. And like, sure, maybe they became, quote, successful in societal terms, but were they a success in their own life? It's unclear, which is also why Bonnie Ware was she was a palliative nurse who's basically she worked with dying patients basically, and she did a very large sample size study with those patients on their biggest regrets at the end of life. And one of the biggest regrets people had was not living a life true to themselves. And I think that's related to this idea of maximizing the energy with which you go through life with. And Marcel was also talking about how that aligns with, even at the micro sense of, when your energy is high, maximize your study ability, especially because sometimes studying is hard, and figuring out when your energy is high and maximize that, which again goes back to his energy is super high right now. He's like, all right, I'm gonna go and study. Another key idea, which I think is related with this whole ego sense, is experiment safely with your Smurf. Like, if you're concerned about your ego on your main account, okay, create a Smurf where nobody knows who you are, and where you can shatter your ego a little bit, and take risks that maybe you wouldn't normally take. And that again goes back to growth and learning. And if you're not experimenting and trying new things and taking risks, it's unlikely that you're learning as much as you could be. Deliberate practice and contrasting decisions with top players, making predictions and error correcting. This is actually a key idea behind that I've really got from Marcel, behind my own practice process. And I made an entire video about this recently, about how I climbed to Challenger in, I forget how many games. I think I did in like 100 or two. Did I do it in 200 games? Every way I studied to hit Challenger. Oh, how I got to Challenger in just 172 games. But a big part of that is from this core idea that I learned from Marcel, which is, I mean, frankly, this process is exactly how an LLM like ChatGPT works. You feed it a large training data set, you make predictions, and you error correct. And then you create a model that way, and that's like your studying process. And then in game, you are actually utilizing the output of that model. And that's just frankly how intelligence works. But for you to do that, you must make predictions and you must error correct. Like, if you're not actively, when you're watching VODs, if you're not actively making predictions, you're passively consuming information, and you're not, like, it's like eating empty calories. You're not actually utilizing the information that's coming into your mind, in which case, like, sure, you might be consuming a ton of TFT content, but you're not actually learning anything from it, which, if that's your goal, if your goal is pure entertainment, like, great. But if your goal is to actually get better, then making predictions and actively engaging with the content is far more important. And then being able to error correct is just as important, right? If you're not actually error correcting, and so part of it is that if you're not making predictions, you might not even be aware of what to error correct. But also, when VOD reviewing your own games, assuming you even do that, if you're not error correcting there, then you're not going to actually get better. Going back to the idea of you either win or you learn. Celebrate wins to fuel the grind. This goes back to like kind of this combination of being humble and confident. Because the grind is hard, learning is hard, losing and making mistakes is hard. And so also celebrating the wins to make sure you maximize your energy so that you have that energy to fuel the grind. He talks about mining error patterns. So looking for clusters of recurring mistakes. I've talked about this before as well, where one of the ways I do that is meta TFT. If you have the overlay and go through your match history, you can actually go through round by round and see round detail where you're winning and losing. So one thing I like to do is go through stage 2, 3, 4 and count basically my wins and losses across a cluster of games. And then what I found before is on certain patches, I remember I did one where across, I think like 12 games, I had only 1 or 2 games where I won, like I had more wins than losses in stage 2 and 3. Because I was completely playing loss streak, which was actually the optimal strategy from the previous patch, maybe previous set. This might have been at the start of the set, I forget. And that is a very clear cluster of recurring mistakes that if I just looked at one game, I might not have seen it as clearly. And then study groups and targeted VOD reviews. So by targeted VOD reviews, and I think that's related to mining these error patterns, is the moment I can see like, oh, stage, let's say 4, and I've had patterns where stage 4 I'm repeatedly losing and not on a positive ratio there, which is really important because that's where you lose like huge chunks of your HP. And I've had to learn this kind of the hard way, where losing a single round in stage 4 could be like a 1 to 2 placement diff, especially at high elo. But doing targeted VOD reviews where you can just jump to that aspect of your game that you want to work on and improve at, because then you can be really focused. Or let's say if you're focused on augment selection, you can just jump to that specific section. And you can VOD review, whether it's your own games or VOD review a top streamer, just jump to augment selection. Or let's say you want to work on your item slams, then go jump to 2-1, figure out, make a prediction on what you think the pros item slam is going to be, and then compare it with what they actually do. Go to carousel, predict what carousel choice they would make, compare what they did compared to what you did, and look for patterns, right? And act critically about why they made the decision they did, instead of passively assuming that, something is right in a global sense. Like let's say augment selection. It's always, context always matters. Like an S tier augment in a specific context could be like C tier, whereas a C tier augment in a different context could be an A or an S tier augment. And I think when I was more like in the diamond area, like that was harder for me to understand, but now it's like a lot more clear. All right, Marcel's Reddit post. He put together a really great Reddit post a year ago, which has a lot more stuff than what's here, but I want to just focus on ideas related to this meta mindset. Use error patterns and habits in your gameplay to guide what you should work on. You can't rely on a single session and a single person to point all your deeply rooted misunderstandings that are holding you back in TFT. So that's related with what I just talked about. And play more open-minded and freely, potentially on a Smurf account to test different playstyles. And these are both ideas going back to growth mindset, how to keep learning and improving the accuracy of your play and minimizing your errors. All right, so with that said, I'm going to go through Marcel's. I basically went through all 5 hours on 2x speed here and took notes on the fundamental learnings that I got out of it. I want to focus on stuff that's less patch specific. There is some patch specific stuff that I pulled in, like Kale is broken for this patch if you have open bow. Of course, you need econ, but I didn't really want to like focus too much on that since the new patch is, I think 15.5 is coming out in a few days. So really the fundamental takeaways is what I want to focus on. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on these as well. Always love to hear your feedback in the comments below. All right, so starting off for set 15, power up. This is like order of operations when you are doing a roll down or augment selection, whether you're thinking about slamming items first versus doing your power up first versus positioning. You always want to do your power up first because your game plan and board and positioning may change depending on the power up. So like, for example, you get, what was it? So what's the frontline one? The tank solo frontline one. I forgot what it's called. But basically you get an ordinary power up, then you might want to, have no traits active, which is actually the scenario that came up in one of his games. If you get critical threat, you might want to slam guard breaker as opposed to a tank item. If you get solo frontline, then you might want to shift your positioning, right? So basically what this is saying is that the power-ups can influence how you slam items, the units you put on board, and how you position. And I've always been doing power-up after combat start, which I've been, screwed many times because of that, how that influences your positioning. But I gotta really prioritize this for this set, especially if I'm trying to make snapshot for tournament and optimizing for tournament as well. Turn conscious behavior into habits. So he's saying for this example, it's like what I do is I actually write down I have a whiteboard desk, the 2 to 3 things that I'm working on at any time. And so I wrote down fruit before position and items on my desk. And before each game, I'll look at it so I can focus on what's the deliberate thing that I want to make into a habit. And once I play enough games with these things and I'm repeatedly working on these things, then it becomes a habit. So then it's automatic. And then I can figure out what's the next thing that I want to focus my awareness on, deliberately practice, and turn that conscious behavior into an unconscious habit. Impact of time pressure. So in this spot, he was saying that he made a mistake on picking Ordinary over Solar Breath. And part of that was because he was low on time. He wanted to optimize his board. He wanted to pick the best. And by the way, picking this power-up influences what he puts on his board, right, with Ordinary. But he was short on time. And so the analogy he made was that in chess, you often make poor decisions due to time pressure. And the problem in that situation, you might criticize that you made the poor decision in the first place, but the thing that you can improve on is not necessarily that you could have made the better decision. The mistake that you made was allowing yourself to get into time pressure in the first place. And that's for sure true in chess, right? So the key here is actually don't over criticize yourself for the poor decision. Let's figure out how can you manage your time better in the future so that you don't end up in a spot where you're in time pressure and making poor decisions. So that's just really insightful. And I've heard many top players talk about this as well, as you end up in stage 5 or something, or stage 4, and you maybe like feel like, oh, I low rolled because there were 3 people contesting my Star Guardian spot or something, or 4 people, like if the meta is very narrow. And you think like, oh, I low rolled, or oh, like, I don't know, maybe I should have rolled on 4-1 instead of 4-2 so I can get better odds over the people that are contesting me. But maybe what you're not thinking about is that the mistake was not so much whether you rolled on 4-1 or 4-2, though that can make an impact. The mistake may have been actually at 2-1 when you were selecting your augment and trying to figure out what line you were going down and not actively scouting well enough to see that, like, hey, one guy selected Star Guardian crest, another guy has a Syndra 2 with a Rel 2 and a Rage Blade or Shojin Slam that will likely go into Jinx, and yet still deciding to contest them in the first place, right? So the key idea here is that the poor decisions or low rolls that you end up with may have had much earlier decision points that caused that to happen, which you had far more control and agency over that you may not be aware of. And this is where like getting coaching can be extremely helpful, but also when you're reviewing your games, trying to think about those first, second, third order effects and where the initial branching points could have changed certain outcomes can be very useful. In this spot, he is a core idea. Marcel's Hangma is like with 1 class reroll. Once you hit your 3-star, you really need to be strong in that phase of the game. You basically need to expect to full streak stage 3 here, and so that's step number 1. So step number 2 is how do you build the strongest board? And part of it is like, okay, you scout lobby, you see how AD focus versus non-AD focus is to decide whether you slam Bramble Vest or not. And in this lobby, I think it was slightly more AP than AD. But he was saying, let's say, regardless of that, let's say it's neutral, he would argue that Sunfire is actually stronger than Bramble for the reason that, as a general principle, one utility item on a tank is going to be more valuable than one traditional tank item. And the reason for that is because of multiplicative scaling. That if you have 3 traditional tank items, they scale with each other in power because you have a Bramble, you have, let's say, a Redemption, that it's like you're taking less damage and then you're healing back up, so you get even more effect on that Bramble. Whereas a utility item doesn't need to scale or have multiplicative effect. It just, does anti-heal and burn in of itself. Or if you have Shred, that utility item does not need to scale with your other items. And so therefore, when you're thinking about, if you're in a spot where you need to build strongest board and you only have one tank item, utility is usually going to be stronger than a traditional tank item. Another core idea is that on certain items like Gambler's Blades, the stats are going to be fake on your main carry because usually you're going to move them off in the late game. And so if you look at the stats on, let's say, Kale 3 with Gambler's Blade, the stats I don't think look very good. Yeah, plus 0.15. But if you think about the way that Kale wins a game, it's by getting to level 9 and capping out with like a Varus 2, what is it? Lee Sin 2, right? But this gold definitely helps you get there. And so you have to think critically about the stats, because oftentimes Gambler's Blade can help you get there, but you're usually reforging the Gambler's Blade at that point, or you are moving it off your main carry of Kale. And so really thinking about what the stats mean, and in this specific situation, knowing that Gambler's Blade stats are fake. Another core idea is that Marcel learned is that he was saying he almost never picked Scavenger, but he saw that someone else that he respected was prioing it. And this goes back to this idea of making predictions and error correcting. And you're thinking about, like, if, especially in situations where a top player that you respect makes a decision that you actively thought was bad or that you would never make, and thinking critically about why they made that decision, or asking other people, right? Whether that's on Discord, whether that's on Reddit, or even in game. Like, there's someone that asked me in game, like, oh, why did you pick this in that spot? And I was like, oh, it's just because I had no other good options, right? And so maybe that is the reason. But kind of thinking critically instead of just assuming that certain things are bad, right? Because that's where you have the most arbitrage opportunity to improve, is the things that you assume are bad that are actually good. That's one of the easiest ways to get better. And so in this case, like with Sork or high single target, high burst comps, I think in the specific situation that Marcel was looking at was against another player playing Smolder and heavyweight like Darius, which is high single target DPS when they're both targeting the same unit. His Scavenger can maybe actually be quite good, especially if you have like a naked Jace 3 or a Poppy 2 without full items yet. In this spot, he has triple econ augments, understanding what you're playing for. And so can you play for first, or are you playing for placements? In this case, he's basically saying, because he has triple econ, and he actually hit the Kale slightly behind tempo, particularly given how much gold he had, he is basically saying that he is just trying to optimize for placements. In that case, if you're optimizing for placements, you want to try to get to level 9 as quickly as possible, burn your gold, and not try to greed gold. Conversely, if you are actually trying to play for first, like when you're in check, and he talks about this in detail for his last 2 games, you would want to greed more. You would take that risk to maybe increase your variance, so increase the likelihood that you take a lower placement to maximize your odds of getting a higher placement. But in this case, he's basically saying, if you don't have combat, and you, like, even if you hit your full board, you could still lose to someone with a higher cap than you, then you should just be trying to maximize your HP, which means deploying all your resources as early as possible to preserve HP, which because every loss you take on stage 4 could be 1 placement at the end of the day. Oh, this is very interesting. How reroll and 4-cost metas affect each other. So the basic idea he's saying is that each cost, if 4-cost is good, 3-cost is less good. Basically, if the cost above the tier you are trying to play at is good, then it makes your tier less good. And the reason for that is that if you roll on, all right, so let me start with 1-cost. And actually that Kale example is useful because we saw he was on 3-1 and wanted to win all of stage 3, right? So for you to do well in the game after you hit your 3-star unit, you want to be able to streak until the next cost tier hits their big spike point, right? Like this is all about tempo and understanding when each kind of comp wants to be strong. So if you burn all your gold on 3-1 for a 1-cost reroll, the way you recover that gold and put pressure on the lobby and preserve your HP is by win streaking 3-1 through 4-1. And this is easier to do when there's nobody playing 2-cost reroll. Because if there is someone playing 2-cost reroll and they go all in on 3-2, and let's say you didn't hit your 3-star 1-cost at that point, you maybe deployed a bunch of gold on 3-1, maybe to around 30 gold. You hit a bunch of 2-star, you 2-star your whole board, but then you win 3-1, but then someone does the same thing at 3-2 and they're all 2-star 2-cost and you're all 1-star 1-cost or 2-star 1-cost, then GG, you lost. Same thing for if you're playing 2-cost reroll and someone else is playing 3-cost reroll. Let's say you're playing Jin Mundo and you deployed a bunch of gold on 3-2. Your board is strong 3-2, 3-3, but then on 3-5, a Smolder or a Kog'Maw board, deploys a bunch of gold, or a Viego board, and you lose them. Well, GG, you lost because you deployed a bunch of gold, but you can't recover that gold through a win streak, and on top of that, you're taking losses. And so this basically is like this rock, paper, scissors aspect. An interesting thing is that if 1-cost is, I forget if it was like Marcel was implying that costs that are 2 levels higher, it can align because, like, for example, 3-cost oftentimes will spike on 4-1, depending on whether they have econ or not. But if your 1-cost reroll spikes on 4-1 and you hit everything, then you can actually out-tempo the 3-cost players. And so I think same thing with 2-cost, where if a 2-cost wants to spike on stage 3, but then maybe spikes on like by 4-5, then by the time the 4-cost players hit all their 2-star 4-cost, but if you're all 3-star 2-cost, then you could beat those 4-cost boards. And so like there's this rock, paper, scissors aspect. And on top of that, if there's a bunch of 2-cost reroll players, other people want to also 2-cost reroll, which makes it even better. And so that's why in a 2-cost reroll meta where all the 2-star, 3-star 2-costs are good, it makes the 4-costs less good. So this is a very interesting like kind of meta point that I had never really considered before. Which, when you're scouting in the early game, this can be useful in just a broad meta standpoint, but also like from a micro, like just scouting your individual game standpoint. So key idea here is understand why you bought forward and maximize your placements when you're like kind of reviewing your own games. He hit 1 KO on 3-1 in 12 rolls. On average, you're expected to hit some like 1 KO in about 10 to 12 gold, I believe. So in about 5 to 6 rolls. So he was definitely lower than average on his roll down here. And so when he was trying to think about like what I could have done better here, he was saying a 5th is fine from this spot because if he did hit an extra kill in expectation, he would have been able to push level 9 like maybe 1 or 2 rounds earlier, been able to put more pressure on the lobby, and been able to eke out maybe 1 placement higher. or maybe even capped out even higher than that, because that like kind of hitting that escape velocity could have snowballed. But really, like, understanding why you, like, your goal is not necessarily to always figure out how you could have gotten first place in every game. Your goal when you're VOD reviewing is to figure out what you could have done to maximize the placements you get, because you can't actually get first in every game. Like, and oftentimes in some games, getting sixth is actually the best placement you could have gotten. But being able to optimize that difference between 8th and 7th versus 8th and 6th is actually a very big deal, because preserving LP matters. Preserving your placement in a lot of times in these tournaments, you know, I'm on the bubble. You could lose tiebreaker, or you could just miss bubble by like 1 or 2 points. And it's not oftentimes whether you got first or second in the game. Oftentimes it's like, how could you not have gotten an 8 in this spot that makes the difference between whether you make the next day in the tournament or not. All right. Even if you're trying to win, sometimes it could be worth it to fake out Crystal Gambit to make them lose more HP, then put your strong units in. This is really high level concept. So I think he's on 5 loss. He does want to start a win here. And he's playing against, in his pool is a Crystal Gambit player, Experion. And he's basically saying you can grief those players by pretending like you're going to put in a weaker board to continue losing streaking, and then put in your strong units after. And by doing that, you're forcing them to position suboptimally and take significantly more damage, especially when you are, Marcel was saying he's competing in placements with Experion because they're both lowest in HP right now, right? And later in the game, when he's coming back and playing against Experion, like, that could be the difference on whether Experion hits escape velocity, gets a big cash out, and then can stabilize because he has an extra life, or whether he dies. And so that this play could save him a placement later in the game. All right, this is a very interesting one too. So in this spot, he has 3 slam tank items because he has worth the wait rel, and he's trying to do augment selection. And in this spot, he's saying the Reforger in branching out actually has significantly more value than it normally would. And the reason for that is because he has 3 tank items already. It's very common for him to get extra, you know, a vest drop or a belt drop, cloak drop off of neutrals, and you don't want that extra tank item, right? But belt's more flexible, but yeah, that Reforger goes up in value. And on top of this, in this specific spot, if he's trying to angle Star Guardian, Star Guardian has a lot of open outs for emblems, whether that's Star Guardian emblem, Bastion emblem, Protector emblem is really good on Poppy, even Edgelord for Xayah. Prodigy is very good, which is also why Star Guardian is one of the best lines to go into from a flexible augment start. But yeah, I would not really consider, I always think about branching out as high variance, but like this Reforger, I just use as an afterthought. But thinking critically about when is the Reforger more valuable than normal is optimizing all these very small nuanced things makes a huge difference. In this spot, this is actually a concept that I've been, Marcel specifically has given me a lot of active feedback on because I make this mistake over and over again, is balancing your front line and back line. In this spot, he's on 3 streak. He wants to maximize strongest board. I think oftentimes I would put in the Nico to maximize shield value, especially because he has Crown Guard, and that just increases the tankiness of your whole team. But he's basically saying he has 3 full tank items. He has a 3-star rel. He lacks damage, and so when you're lacking damage, you want to balance that front line and back line. Think about what your comp needs to succeed at any given time, and what his comp needs right now is damage. And so Ahri over Nico makes a lot of sense. Team planner. So one thing that I actually noticed multiple top challenger players doing, and this is a tech that his study group put together, is oftentimes on your team planner roll down, let's say you already found a 2-star, like let's say you're playing Star Guardians. You already found a Syndra, you already found a Rel, and you don't need more of them, but they keep on popping up in your on your roll down and distracting you, right, from being as efficient. So one thing you can do is you duplicate your template, copy paste that team code, make a new one. So to do this, you need to actually have extra space in your like less than 20 comps. You copy paste it into a new team planner comp, and then that way you can make edits to it as you are you get your units. And then also if other players, you want grief other players to hit their 3-star 4 costs, or they're trying to roll for a 3-star 3 cost like Viego or something, then you can add those to your team planner more easily. And that way you're not messing up your original template. So when he was talking about win out versus maximizing placements for going level 9, you really want to consider how healthy you are, how big of a spike you get by getting to level 9, what's your next in, and what's your potential for win out, and how important is winning out. You know, whether or not you're trying to make a snapshot, or if you get a first, you hit that next promotion point, or you're in check in a tournament. Those all influence these decisions. And the more likely you are in a win out setup, then you want to delay that level up. And you're taking a little bit more damage, again, increasing that variance, but increasing your win rate, which might lower your AVP, but increase your win rate. Whereas if you're maximizing placement, that might actually increase your AVP, but lower your win rate. And thinking critically about what that trade-off is. Checkmate format. I don't think I'm going to go into detail on this since most people are not playing tournaments. But if you want to look into it, there's some... This is actually Brosiv's checkmate analysis that he shared with Marcel for the study group. And then, oh yeah, this last one's also about checkmate. Okay, cool. So those are all the fundamental takeaways I learned from Marcel. I just want to say congrats to Marcel again. It's just been amazing to see how well he has improved over time, and the tournament results have been following that. I'm super excited to see him play in Worlds. We'll definitely have, hopefully, a lot more coaching sessions with him that I'll be able to share with you now that I can say he's a champ. And yeah, thanks for watching. I hope you learned something from this. Love to hear your thoughts in the comments below, and I'll see you in the next one.